So, welcome everyone to our August seminar. So let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which I am, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. It's my pleasure to have Dr. Steph Stummel from Transurban here today, who is going to speak about managing uncertainty. Steph is this principal econometrician at Transurban, which is a road transport company with a presence in Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, and North America. She holds a PhD in econometrics and has previously worked with the World Bank and PwC. She's relatively new to the transport industry and she's learning every day, as she says. Before leaving the floor to Steph, I would just remind everyone to mute themselves in order to minimize the noise, and that this meeting, this webinar is recorded to be available for our members afterwards. But apart from that, thank you, Steph, for joining us this evening, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. I'm Steph, and I'd also like to pay respect to any Aboriginal people and respect to country. And one of the things that we try to do here at Transurban with our acknowledgement of country is to put something personal and something quite meaningful in with that as a way of trying to connect deeply with Indigenous Australia when we make that acknowledgement of country. And so one thing I wanted to share with you is that I also am on Gadigal land in Eora Nation. But did you all know that a lot of our early colonial roads were based on Aboriginal paths that were already here once colonisation started? And so many of our roads that are very old, through Sydney in particular, are actually have a lineage all the way back to the oldest continuous country on the planet, oldest continuous culture rather on the planet. And when I found that out, that always seemed something to be very special to me. So that's something that we know about Gadigal country here in Sydney. Now, I'm Steph Stummel, and I'm the principal econometrician at Transurban. And a lot of people have not heard of either my company, or a lot of people haven't heard about what an econometrician is. So just to give you a bit of a context, I got here almost entirely by accident. So as I think I've mentioned before we started recording, I wrote a PhD in theoretical econometrics, looking at limit distributions for longitudinal and panel data for non-stationary time series. This did not prepare me well for a life of applied data because I had no intention of ever doing that. But for many twists and turns, I ended up working as an applied worker all over the place. And now I'm here at Transurban. So as a theoretical econometrician, I've always had a lot in common with statistical practice, and in fact moonlight as a statistician as and when required. And so that's my connection with the Statistical Society and the statistical community. In terms of, who are we at Transurban? Let's see if we can make that happen. We are a roads company, and our main calling, our purpose is to strengthen communities through transport. There's a map here of Sydney, and the green lines you can see are the assets that we manage. So has everybody ever driven on a road in Sydney? Probably most of us have driven on a road in Sydney. If you've ever driven on a tolled road in Sydney, there is a very good chance that you've driven on a Transurban asset. So in the last few years, we opened the North Connects. West Connects has opened in the last couple of years. We manage the M7, the M5, the M2, the M4, the Eastern Distributor, and the Cross City Tunnel. So we do a bit. And we also have a presence in Melbourne, where we manage the CityLink asset and tollway. And in Brisbane, we have management of Legacy Way. Let me see, this is going to test me now. Gateway, Logan, and Airport Link, as well as a couple of other small pieces. In North America, we have assets in both Virginia and Washington. So we've got a lot of roads. Now, the thing about roads is that they are one part of a citywide transport network. Mobility is a form of equity. If a person can't move around, they can't access jobs or healthcare or be able to shop for fresh food or any one of a number of other things. Roads are one part of a transport network, but they aren't the whole part, and they never should be. But we work with roads. I work in the traffic team at Transurban, and our core purpose as a team is to drive better transport outcomes. That is what we do, and that is what we aim to do. Now, if we're going to strengthen communities through transport by managing and building major road infrastructure, it's not enough for us to know what the city is going to do right now, right? Because we need to know how the city is going to behave in the future. Does anybody remember when the M5 opened? Is anyone old enough to remember? I think possibly John and I are the only ones. That is a piece of infrastructure that's been around for, well, over 20 years. Okay, these pieces of infrastructure last for decades. So in terms of, what we do and how we support a city, it's about 163 average tonnes of freight volume carried for every person in Australia every year. So that's a bit. About 80% of freight in Sydney, in Greater Sydney, is done by road. And there's about 9.2 million households in Australia shopped online in calendar year 2021. So about 80%, 4 in 5 households. 3.4 million households made online purchases. 93% plan to maintain or increase our online shopping. We've got 6,000 trucks were shifted just by North Connects alone off local roads. 9,000 trucks are going to be moved off local roads by Westgate when that opens, and about 6,000 large vehicles on average use the A25 every day. So one of the main things that our roads do is they move a lot of freight and around, and a lot of trucks, which don't necessarily belong on local roads or can be better served elsewhere. Now, I currently live in the Shire, which is down here around somewhere. And in order to get to work at Chifley every day, I come down Fairford Road, join the M5, go onto the M5 East, turn off to Port Refinery Drive up here somewhere, go past the airport, onto the Eastern Distributor, and get off at William Street where my actual house is, where I park and then walk into work. So I get to see a lot of our assets every morning. And some of the things that I'm looking for are, how many trucks do we have on the road right now? So has anybody seen container trucks? So trucks moving around great big metal boxes that are about 20 feet long. These get stacked up onto container ships in the port and moved all over the world. We import a huge number of them every year. And it's the main way that freight is imported for a lot of types of commodities. I watch those on the roads every single day. I'm also always looking out for light commercial vehicles or utes that are being used for trade goods, because that tells me a lot about how much building might be going on. I'm also looking at the types of people that are commuting. So it turns out when I drive in early, there are a lot more people on the road wearing high-vis vests. Does anyone want to take a guess as to why that might be? No one? Thomas, do you know why there might be more high-vis vests driving on our roads before 7 a.m. every morning? Want to take a guess?
For constructions?
Yeah, different types of workers. So the classic commuter that we think of, someone that drives into the city, parks and goes into an office job, it's only a really small part of people who are driving on any road at all. There are a lot of tradies and small business people as well. So I'm the principal econometrician, and what's my job? Well, We do a few things in the traffic team, but we monitor, we predict, we optimize, and then we advise. So we monitor our network. This green network that you can see here is only one very small part of the entire road network and a smaller part still of the whole transport network in Sydney. And it's the same in the other cities where we exist. So we monitor the health of that and how it's moving. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of interconnections with other roads and other parts of the transport network. It's not enough for us to be a bit of an island and just do our own thing. We got to work with everybody else, and we've got to make sure things move smoothly and mostly safely. That's the most important thing for us. So we monitor, we predict, we do a lot of work on forecasting. So we do a lot of work on forecasting to advise the business about what's going to happen next week, next year, next month, 40 years from now. Like I said, in infrastructure, we go long. So we have a big impact on the cities that we work in. If we do the job well, then we're strengthening communities through transport. If we don't make good forecasts and build good models of our future cities, then we're not building infrastructure that helps the communities we're claiming to be. So, let's see. In infrastructure, we go long and really long term in infrastructure, particularly with our models and forecasts. So good infrastructure lasts for decades. Okay, so I mentioned before that the M5 is decades old, and we expect all of the assets that we manage and maintain to be, 30, 40 years at least. For instance, the Eastern Distributor, I think I was about 10 when that might have opened, and I'm not 20 now, let me tell you. It's been a while. Great infrastructure serves the community now and into the future. People are still using that road every single day to make a major thoroughfare through our city decades later. So this is really generational forecasting, which was something quite new to me when I joined Transurban. By the time that my children are grandparents, that's when some of these roads will be decommissioned. So we're building for ourselves and we're building for the next generation. So as a company and as a group, we have to decide what we build, how we build it, and based on that, what is the city going to need in 40 years' time? That's the big questions that we have as a traffic team. Now, that's a lot. Has anybody else ever had to do that kind of generational forecasting before? Well, let me tell you, I always meant to be more humble than I was, and then I joined Transurban in the middle of COVID, and I got a lot more humble than I ever intended to be because, oh boy, we live in interesting times. So forecasting is pretty tricky at the best of times, but right now it's really hard. So here we've got successive RBA forecasts for CPI four-quarter change. So these forecasts start from the 1990s and move all the way up to, I think I have the most recent one here, so August 2022. Now, the colour changes as the forecast date changes, right? So purple is back in the 90s, yellow is about nowish. If we look over in the early 90s, we could see that there was a huge amount of uncertainty around CPI. This was a period of inflationary expectation setting. Does anybody, how many economists do I have in the room? I'm going to take that as being 0. So if I give you the basic economics 101, is that okay? Yeah. So during the 80s, Australia and much of the world was experiencing really high inflation. So all this concern about inflation that we have currently, that was, the last time we had a really big hit around that was in the 90s. And so the Reserve Bank set out on a period of what's called inflation's expectation setting, where it basically was training the market to understand that it would stick to this inflation target that it had set between 2 to 3%, and it would do what was necessary to get there. So do any of you have ever heard of your parents complaining about high interest rates? Lots of people are concerned about interest rates now. Back in the 90s, 10, 12, 13% mortgage rates were common. Okay, so these were really high inflation rates, really high mortgage rates for interest rates. And so you can see here the Reserve Bank had a lot of uncertainty about what inflation would be. It starts to get much more tight as it forecasts them, but you can still see there's a fair bit of uncertainty there as we go through. So lately, there's been a bit of uncertainty as well, but that doesn't look like it's nearly as much as it was in the early 90s. So we're living in interesting times, really interesting times. So this is the RBA's private dwelling investment forecasts, i.e. how much are people going to be spending investing in housing over the next little bit. Same deal, this comes from the we're calling it the late teens, the late 2010s. I don't know, but anyway, starts from after 2000, and you can see that there's a huge amount of uncertainty around here in 2021 and 2020. We had massive differences in these forecasts, and it's beginning to settle down, these forecasts, and trend downwards. So the RBA is not 100% sure, and they're the best in the business. So it's pretty rough to be a forecaster. Our times are super interesting. So this is a comparison of the RBA's forecast for a whole bunch of different series between August 2022 and in green, that's the November 21 forecasts. Okay, look at the consumer price index here. These are not even on the same page, right? Very, very different. Employment, not too bad. Business investment looks completely different. Unemployment rate, so lots and lots of big differences, and these are percentage changes. Okay, so the RBA are out there and they are forecasting, and they don't have a high degree of certainty for a lot of these things. And they're forecasting univariate or multivariate series going forward in time, and it's hard. And they've got the best in the business. But if you're building a city or you're building infrastructure that goes out into the long term, you've got a lot more to forecast. This is just, sort of, what are these? Is it 4 or 5 years in advance? We're forecasting 40 years into advance. And we also need to do it geospatially. And we also need to do it under scenario conditions and simulated conditions as well. Because by the nature of what we're doing, if we build a big road, we're changing the city. So we can't just forecast a purely historic series. So that's my job. It's a lot of fun, but it's quite hard. And I can't do it all alone. An econometrician or a statistician has a lot to offer under these circumstances. Or so I keep saying to the guy that sets my salary. So far it's working out okay. But these skill sets by themselves are not enough to solve these problems, not in good ways. Okay, so what do we do when it's no longer just economics, when it's no longer just time series of a fairly short nature? What happens if we have to start forecasting decades into the future to make sure we're building the right things? You need a little help from your friends at that point, don't you? And luckily I have a few of them. So how much does this really matter? Okay, here I've got the forecast for GDP, again, from the RBA. And this was something that we saw earlier, the underlying 4-quarter change for GDP. So we didn't quite see this earlier, but this is the similar graphs to what you've seen. So the difference from a forecast made here to a forecast made here is a huge amount in GDP. Okay, so these small changes really, really matter, particularly when you start adding time. So this is just a few years, this one here. What if it's decades? Okay, you can imagine how that delta is changing a long way into the future. So has anybody ever experienced this kind of problem before? Anyone ever had a big forecasting or modeling problem to work on like this? Come on, John, you must have done something, mate.
No, haven't done that.
Well, there's lots of ways to go big, right? But in the traffic team at Transurban, we go real big. Because the other thing is, it's not just about 40 years' time, it's also about what happens next Tuesday. Or why is there always a tailback on a Wednesday morning at around 8 a.m. on Port Refinery Drive turning off from Southern Cross Drive. Okay, we've got a bit of a queuing pattern there. Just after the airport runway, you know the tunnel that runs under the airport runway? That's not even our asset. That's like a state road. There's always a tailback there. And the issue there is that lots of trucks are queuing up to turn. Do you know why I care about that as a traffic econometrician? I care about that because queuebacks like that can be dangerous. They can lead to driver behaviour that's unpredictable. It can lead to rear-end accidents. So how can we as a group manage our assets better to try and help that kind of problem go away or to be mitigated as much as we can based on how we manage our assets? So it's the it's the small microscopic things that make a difference to everyday safety, as well as the big generational forecasts that make a difference to how healthy our city is going to be in 40 years' time. So we're having fun over there, and there's no end of the problems that we have to try and solve. We find one and we get another one. Now, with this huge array of problems that we have to deal with, or challenges to solve, I've come to the conclusion that it's all about opinions. I think of every model and every forecast as an opinion about our future or about the future. Sometimes I have a really strong opinion, and sometimes my opinion is very ambivalent. And the reason for that can be that I don't have enough information, or the information I do have is uncertain, or I don't have structure. But by recognizing which opinions I'm making and whether they're strong or ambivalent, I can start to go and find out what is the good opinion to hold here. There's never a right opinion. I haven't been right as an econometrician or a data scientist or whatever else I'll answer to this week. I haven't been right since I left theoretical work and stopped simulating my own data. So it's not about being right. It's about having a good opinion. Okay, and a good opinion is one that we can stand behind and say, this is some good information to make our decision on. It's the best we can do. So what's a strong opinion or an ambivalent one? And speaking to a group like this, I can say that, I think of a strong opinion as one where our view of the future can be represented by a specific mechanism or a data generating process. I might believe, for example, that the trips that people take, going to school, going to shops, going to, work, the number of trips a household takes is going to increase with the number of people in the household. Does that feel like it's quite a specific mechanism? It's pretty solid, number of trips coming out of a household. It doesn't have to be road trips, it could be any kind of trip. Function of the number of people in the household. So if I'm talking about, say, the number of trips emanating from a particular travel zone, that would be a function of the number of people in that travel zone, right? That seems okay. So a travel zone is a particular measure of space that we use. We have about 2,500 of them in Sydney. So there's the ABS measures of space. So we have SA4, SA3, SA2. And we put the travel zone at that next level. And that helps us divide up the city and to understand how different patterns of behaviour are emerging. So I believe that there is a strong opinion or understood mechanism about why people are taking trips and how many there are. So far, so good. An ambivalent opinion might be one where we've got a view of the future that's not something that we have a strong understanding of a mechanism or not. So that might be something like, think about transport, we always think about strong mechanisms. It might be things like, how does Twitter posts relate to the amount of trips being taken in a week? I don't have a good mechanism for you there. Maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't, but I don't have a good opinion on that relationship. It's not supported by any particular mechanism or generating process that I can stand behind. A strong opinion, or a strong bet, as I like to call it sometimes, requires some really specific beliefs about the structure of the problem. So going back to structure, population and trips are positively related. And I believe that the causation behind that is that, the number of people increases, trips increase. Trips don't increase the number of people, do they? The causation is very, very clear. Whereas an ambivalent opinion might be that, Twitter posts are a good proxy for describing the number of trips. It's not really supported by a domain knowledge or any particular theory, but it might be a useful proxy, but I'm a bit ambivalent about it. Strong opinions can be really useful when there's very little data available. So I usually tell people that econometrics is a history of false compromises. A large amount of the statistics discipline is based on experimental work, right? That's a big part of why statistics exists. The difficulty in econometrics is that we can't stop the universe and ask to get off, please. Let's just shut the economy down, guys, and we'll run it again and see what happens. We'll run it 100 times and see if our estimated mean fits what we thought it would be at about 95% of those. We can't do that. Don't think you run experiments 100 times very often either, but we don't have that ability to run an experiment or hold a control, right? The Australian economy is the Australian economy. The Sydney economy is the Sydney economy. We put a road in, we don't put a road in. We can't do both. So strong opinions are really the mainstay of econometrics. It's about positing very specific data generating processes and testing those. Whereas, say, for machine learning, there are lots of ways of using machine learning that don't necessarily have that same strong opinion on how the data is generated. So if I went to speak to some of my colleagues who are computer scientists and I said, hey, how would you forecast this? They might not think about it in terms of causative beliefs or mechanisms or structures or thinking deeply about what the data generating process is. They might have a more ambivalent opinion, right? I'm going to throw the data at it and give it a go. That doesn't make it bad, right? When you're looking at roads over a long time, you want a strong opinion. If you're trying to forecast sales for toilet paper on Amazon and you've got 30,000 different brands, an ambivalent opinion that is, data driven might actually be a much more sensible option because you can actually have one. Having a strong opinion on 30,000 brands of toilet paper, that's a tall order. It's not always a good use of time. So strong opinions can be used when you don't have a lot of data available. So if I want to understand, how many kilometres will be driven in Sydney in 2065, that's a long shot, right? That's a very long shot in terms of forecasting. So I can't just throw some data at it and hope. What I need to do is think very deeply about what the mechanism generating total number of kilometres driven is and how that might change and very carefully build up a model from there. Okay. So in that case, a strong opinion can be a really, really good one. A strong opinion might have a strong claim to interpretability that's vetted by domain knowledge. So if I came along and said, well, the number of trips that are taken to work is what's causing population growth, that doesn't matter. That doesn't match up with our domain knowledge there, does it? My model is interpretable in ways that make sense. Whereas an ambivalent position might be more about recognizing that a forecast might be a result of proxies or instruments and not necessarily causal. If I want to understand, demand for toilet paper, for example, I may or may not do a survey on the nutritional state and menu of the Australian household and consequences thereof. Or I might just look at historic data and put a line through it and a simple model and say, for my particular purposes, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so ambivalent opinions aren't bad ones, and strong opinions aren't necessarily good ones. It's about getting the right type of opinion or model or forecast and understanding what you're trading off. And that's what I do a lot of here at Transurban. Funnily enough, the general manager does not care if I do something clever or innovative. He just wants me to do it good. So yes, he hardly ever listens to my wonderful stories about things. He's a good guy, don't get me wrong. I do love working for him, but he doesn't respect asymptotic theory, everybody. It's very sad. He just wants good roads and good understandings of what we do. So for me here at Transurban, I am one of many disciplines in my team, because I don't have all the answers, and a lot of the time I don't even know all the questions. Right? I'm relatively new to transport. Some of it makes sense, like the more people, the more trips. Makes sense to me. The closer somebody lives into the city centre with better accessibility, the more likely they are going to use public transport. When I live in Woolloomooloo, which is just near the Eastern Distributor in the Botanic Gardens, I don't drive to work. It's a 20-minute walk. Whereas when I live in the Shire, I drive to work. It's a much longer walk. I tested it once, about 9 hours, according to Google. Right? So these kinds of causal mechanisms, some of them are obvious, others are not. So some of the questions we ask are really long term. So how many people are going to live in Sydney in 2065? Somewhere between a lot and a real lot, but we need to get a bit more specific than that. Where are these people going to live? Are we going to have dense corridors along transit lanes? Are we going to have a very, very spread city? Are we going to actually have one continuous city between here and Newcastle and Wollongong? Is there 3 cities proposal? So River City, Park City, and Harbour City. Is that how it's going to be looking like? Well, that matters for how we design transport, right? What are these people going to do? How old are they going to be? What kind of jobs are they going to do? Is it going to be laptops at 50 paces? How many of us here worked through the pandemic on our laptops at home? Right? A lot of us did. How many of us had family or friends who were still traveling without laptops, or weren't traveling at all and didn't have a job during the pandemic? Each of us have very different patterns of travel behaviour, and more importantly, really different needs of the transport network. And those needs might be very different in 2065. So where will these people work? Where will they want to go? Okay. How many people here live in Western Sydney? I lived there for a very long time. And, one of the things we've known about Western Sydney for a very long time is that there aren't always the opportunities that there are in the inner suburbs. All right. So if we go back to our 3 cities idea, there's a centre in Parramatta, there's a centre in Liverpool, and there's a centre in current CBD. If that's working really well, and we have 3 distinct hubs of Sydney, then where people want to go might be really different than if we just devolve and sit on this one CBD hub, right? Very different transport needs. Okay, we don't know where people want to go, but how are they going to get there? If someone said to you 2 years ago, yeah, you'll pick up a scooter on the side of the road and then just zoom your way down. That seems unlikely, but it's a common, isn't it? If somebody said to you 3 or 4 years ago, look, we're all going to sit inside for 6 months and be working from home completely, that seemed unlikely as well. So, for instance, a lot of mobility, particularly public transit, which has not recovered yet, came to a grinding halt during the pandemic. So how are people going to get where they're going? Because I'm not convinced that what we do today is going to be the same thing as what they do in 40 years' time. Makes sense? How are people going to pay for their travel? How will they want to travel? And that's different. Then we've got the short-term questions. What does a post-COVID world look like? People ask me this all the time. I don't know, we're not post-COVID yet. Are we ever going to be post-COVID? No idea. How many people are going to build a house in the next 5 years? Where are they going to put those houses? How much freight is going to go on the inland rail from Melbourne to Brisbane, and how much is going to go by road? How does inflation impact households? So these are all the questions that I have to deal with every day, and that my team needs to deal with every day. And a lot of those we solve, and then we resolve, and then we unsolve, because lately things have been a little bit difficult. I can't do it all by myself. This is definitely a help from my friends situation. So I'd like you to meet my friends. We have 7 distinct areas in the traffic team, and each of them has their own thing that they do to help us build to a bigger whole. So we have our project management group, and basically building infrastructure requires a lot of coordination, and managing 30 different analyst types and modelers requires even more than that. We've got transport advisory, which is a group that basically exists to say, okay, Steph, your forecasts are great, but what do they actually mean? And how do they fit in with all of the other models that we see and everything else that's going on in our world? Because context and interpretation is everything. We've got the transport optimization group, and they exist to do exactly what it says on the box. What they do is they make the road and the traffic flow efficient, and more importantly, they make it safe. Okay, so this is a group that lives and breathes safety. We all do at Transurban, but they are the ones that make sure that the design of the road is as safe as possible, and that also the management of the road is safe as possible. So for instance, did you know that in congested periods where people are starting on the road, rear-end accidents are much more common? Yeah, that makes more sense. Did you know that if you slow down the traffic about 20 minutes before the congestion starts, A, you can avoid a lot of the congestion, and B, drop the number of accidents? And they proved that on the M7 and wrote a paper about that, which is pretty amazing. So active management of the transport network can make the roads safer and more efficient, and make for a better experience for everybody. We've got the traffic analytics group. So, you know, what's happening right now on our roads? How long is it taking people to get there? They also look at things like emissions, for example. We've got the strategic modelling group. Has anybody ever heard of strategic modelling? As opposed to Steph's whatever goes modelling. So strategic modelling belongs to a school of modelling, 4-stage modelling, or land use and transport infrastructure modelling. These guys are building models, and women are building models that span decades, and they span the entire city. So if you want to know how many people are going to be driving from the Shire to Woolloomooloo on an average work day in 2037, they've worked it out. Which is, yeah, Kevin, the look on your face was my look when I first heard that this is what they do. That is some serious top-notch modelling. They're amazing. We have the land use team. So if we want to model what's going to happen next year, let alone in 40 years' time, then how people are going to use the land in the city is really important. Where do they live? Where do they work? What density are they looking at? And so on. And then we have the predictive analytics group, which is econometrics, machine learning, statistics, you know, a la carte. And that's me and my group. Now, to put it another way, or how I actually think of it, okay, we've got project management, and they keep us all on the same page, and transport advisory, they keep our questions and our answers on the same page as business. Transport optimization, make cars go brum. Traffic analytics, count the cars going brum. I had many toddlers at one stage of my life. Strategic modelling. If a tree falls in the woods in 40 years' time, what impact does that have on construction traffic? Land use, who the hell put that shopping centre there? Which may or may not be something that I've yelled across the room occasionally. And predictive analytics, which I like to think of as witchcraft, divination, and augury as a service. So this is one of the ways we think of ourselves. That's a lot of really different people and capabilities. Okay, and how do we put it all together? Because my little world over here in witchcraft, divination, and augury, otherwise known as econometrics, it's only got one small part of the puzzle. I can't solve the safety problems. This whole idea of modelling citywide networks and telling you what will happen on the average work and school day in 2035, I can't do it. I can't do it by myself. Land use, analytics, we all work together. So we all live together in this one big cohabitating traffic family. And like all families, it can be really hard to get us all around the same table. But for instance, a lot of my work feeds straight into the strategic modelling group. A strategic model isn't a statistical model. It's really a series of smaller modules and algorithms that feed together. And so a lot of the inputs are coming straight out of my group. I support the land use group as well, my group does. We do a lot of the automation work. If you've got 2,500 travel zones in Sydney and you're forecasting them decades in advance, down to job type by industry, white collar, blue collar, production, residents, households, school-age children, you get the idea. That's a lot of data. So we provide a lot of the services to them to vet that, to automate a lot of their processes and to do those sorts of checks. A lot of that we buy in as well. Transport optimization, yeah, that's the traffic engineers. And so we support them with a lot of their data. They support us. And so it all goes around in one big happy family until project management and transport advisory have to basically herd the cats together. And then they find out that someone has put firecrackers on the tails of all the cats. So that can be quite a big thing. But the exciting thing for us is that while we don't have all the answers by ourselves, it's amazing to work in a truly multidisciplinary group to solve some of these things. Because at the end of the day, the numbers and the models are never enough. We need to step up a level, talk to transport advisory and say, we might have 3 or 4 different goes at forecasting this. How do they all fit together and what do they mean for us? Which are the strong opinions? Which ones are the ambivalent ones? Which ones fit with what we know about what's going to happen that might be qualitative? And which ones make sense with all of the decades of experience that all of this team has with modelling. The average tenure in this group is 8 years. That's how long the average person in this group has been with the group. And so we have a very top-heavy group, unlike a lot of places where as you move on the hierarchy, you have to lose your technical skills or they become less important or undervalued. The GM who I worked for once said, we're spending all this money on roads and stuff, so I figure I'm going to hire the best people and pay them well and then keep them. And I went, so we have a lot of very senior people who have been with us and doing this for decades. And they stay because the problems are always very challenging, but their skills are always very respected. So it's not a case of going to management and you have to step away. I sit on the leadership team and I'm still technical as hell. So that's really great from my point of view. So lastly, I'm just aware of the time, how do we all work together? Because that's really hard. We have about 30 people in our team. I think we've got about 8 PhDs, a lot of people that aren't PhDs, but really know am I allowed to swear here? They really know their stuff. So we're definitely not a group that wants everybody to have a PhD. One of the people in my group, I particularly wanted him to work for my group was because he thinks so differently to me. And I can send him along to try work something out and he'll come back and he'll say, Steph, but why are we doing this? And it's amazing. He is so clever because he doesn't think like me. So we're a very diverse bunch in terms of what we value and who we are. So this is a fairly simplified version of how we try to work together as a big group. And, we start with a problem definition or try to workshop that. What is it we're actually trying to do? And we'll explore that for a little. And the great thing about having a project management group is that they can coordinate us so that we're not all rabbit holing in different directions. What a forecast means to me is something very different to what it might mean to a strategic modeler. And what a good model looks like might be very different across our group. So having the project management and transport advisory there to sort of keep us all in one group is a really great thing. And from there, we try and work out what are the key outcomes we want here, right? Because the key outcome isn't for Steph to build a model. The key outcome would be for the traffic group to provide good advice to the business or for the traffic team to provide forecasts that can be used in development process, right? The outcome's never the model. So we might work out what the outcomes we're after and which methods, which groups and people fit, right? It can be really hard to step out of our normal or what's usual. I see a problem and I see a statistical solution every time, whereas a strategic model or a transport engineer might see something different. So we've got to have that conversation. And then there's, what data do we have? What data can we get? Or what data can we make? We work a lot on some innovative practices to produce data that's not otherwise available. And sometimes all that changes. Then we might go off and build and analyze some stuff, work with our SMEs and transport advisory, work out it was wrong, come back and do that a little bit until we're done, and then provide advice to the business. So the difference from working in a multidisciplinary team like this is that we do a lot more upfront to keep us all on the straight and level and know where we're heading. The actual build and analyze for me in my role is relatively small. But the main thing is that we try and stay on the same page. And so that's one of the main ways that we produce great outcomes, is by having that multidisciplinary approach with lots and lots of different expertise coming together to get to one strong opinion. So that was everything from me, really, in terms of the formal outfit. Has anybody got any questions or want to ask me anything about how we do things?
Thank you very much, Steph. Yeah, is there any question?
Oh, can I make just one little announcement? We're hiring.
Absolutely. Oh.
I am in desperate want of a traffic engineer. Couple of them, actually. Those are the roles we're currently hiring for, but we do, semi-regularly look for strategic modelers. My group will eventually need some more people, so please reach out on LinkedIn. We do have a couple of open roles at the moment. If you know anybody in traffic engineering or transport modeling in particular, some of us are generalists like myself, some of us are transport experts. That's part of the secret sauce. But yes, please do reach out.
Good. Kevin.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you, Steph. I have a quick question. So obviously, because of the industry you're working in, you might have to work with the government or certain regulators. How does that play into your sort of modeling or daily work? How does that affect people like you say in the advisory group?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. So we can't be effective at what we do if we aren't working well with our stakeholders. And it's also an incredibly long-term proposition. So this is the only industry I've ever worked in that has academic levels of reproducibility requirements, right? So if I make a model now, it might come back to me in 10 years' time. And we may need to be able to say, why did we make that decision? So we very much value governance and data governance. It's incredibly important to what we do. Transparency and ethics is also mission critical too. So sometimes what we have to say is not necessarily what people want to hear, particularly as modelers, and we have to say it, and we have to be brave enough to say it. And I think integrity is one of the things that we do really well as a team. And it comes from having good leadership that will push that. So that's really important, that we believe in what we say, that we caveat it appropriately. As you can imagine, I think all of you sitting here realize just how difficult a job it is to be forecasting over that area of space and time at that level. And so we have to caveat what we do appropriately and be humble about it. None of us are going to walk out of here with 100% certainty on population in 2042. Not happening. So to provide good advice to the business, we need to do that. And because a lot of our work, particularly in our team, is working day to day with the transport bodies in the relative states, that involves, how do we manage our network in a way to work well in the bigger transport network, right? So it's always got to be 100% collaborative and with a bigger picture. It can never be narrow. We've got a whole city that we need to be a part of in really positive ways. So yeah, there's a lot of that integrity and governance piece, and looking at ourselves as part of the bigger team.
Thank you. I see a question from Alan online. So it's on in the chat. So do you have any modeling team that is doing classic operational research? Yeah. So in the transport optimization group, there's a lot of that going on, down to micro simulation.
classic transport engineering, meso and micro, that makes sense. Meso and micro simulation, operations research, that sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important part of what the group does. And, as someone coming from a statistics or economics background, it's really fun because I was terrible at OR when I was a student. And so I come back to it 20 years later, I'm like, damn, this is interesting. But it also means that there's great opportunities for us to collaborate in ways that haven't been done before. It's kind of like the best piece of academia, in the sense that someone will just reach over and just go, oh, I wanted to do X, Y, Z. I wanted to look why these trucks are slowing down. It's happening about 20% of the time. And we'll just, trade ideas back and forth. How are we going to look at it? How are we going to measure it? What is it that we're seeing? What's causing it? What's the factors? And it's great. It's sitting there with a whole bunch of really smart people who have got completely different ideas to you about how to solve a problem.
Good. And Alan is also asking, what data processing platform do you use? Are you making use of one of the big 3 cloud platforms? Yes.
Yeah. So we are a very data-hungry company. We're a data-driven company, according to our CEO. We use AWS a lot. We use the AWS suite a lot, put it that way. Our group sits under traffic and strategy, so that's where we sit on the business side. We don't sit in tech, but we work very, very closely with tech, with the cloud ops group, with the advanced analytics group, which is classic machine and deep learning. We do that as well. And so we're very, very integrated with tech and data in Transurban because we use it. We sort of sit on a bit of a hub and spoke model. We've got a lot of bench strength and a lot of depth to what we do compared to a classic advanced analytics group. But my group, my little part of it, that's one of the things that we're responsible for is, bringing those tools, things across.
And I see another question. So Danish is asking something that is like the basic discussion about what to teach as well. So which language is popular in what you do? Like R, Python, anything else?
Yeah, look, so I'm a diehard R user, just to be clear. I would like, my groups, we've got our own internal packages. We have a complete suite of forecasting tools and automated reporting. We could set up a set of packages that, we'll run 200-300 forecast models at once in one line using fables, specifying each of them in an Excel sheet that will then spit out a bunch of automated reports so that we can do the human in the loop. Yes, no, don't like that. Think about that more, and on we go. But a multidisciplinary approach requires, a multi-language approach as well. There are some things that Python just does better than R right now, and there's no sense in reproducing the wheel. So if we're doing a deep learning project or computer vision or something like that, then Python's a really great choice. And, there's no sense in us trying to reinvent a wheel that already exists very well. So our philosophy as a predictive analytics group is that we're going to use the best tool for the job. And that, whilst the principal in charge does love her R, other people can do what they need to do to get the job done, and that's fine. As a bigger traffic group, we actually have a lot of tools that we use, and it's not confined to Python or R. So we have C++ programmers, we have cube modelers, there's other people using Python and R as well. A lot of Excel and Tableau. I don't knock it these days because damn, it gets the point across. And it's a very useful way of communicating. It is the lingua franca of business. So yeah, Aimson is a big one if anybody's ever heard of that. So yeah, we're very much a multi-tool group, and it's more about focusing on right for the job rather than Steph's personal philosophy. As much as I'd like to do it differently, I wouldn't be doing my job well if I was, really stuck. So yeah.
I see Kevin has another question.
Yeah, just on that quickly. Some jobs, when they go out and advertise on LinkedIn or whatever platforms, they do ask very specifically for certain skills,
Yep.
like very specific. They ask things like very familiar, have to have top tier publications in natural language processing or something like that. How do you see that sort of job requirement or job description? Would that continue to show up and getting more and more popular? As in the specific requirements will going to come up more, or do you think general?
I hope not, because that's not how I would consider anybody for my group at all.
Sure.
So in my job descriptions, so say I'm looking for somebody tomorrow at the mid-tier range, for example, or junior range. I don't care what you program in if you can program. Because if you can program in C++, you can pick up Python or R, it'll be fine. I don't care what cloud platform you've got experience with. It's great if you do. But really, again, cloud tools are cloud tools. If you've got GitHub, that's fantastic. Yes, please. Do I care if you're actually a PhD econometrician or a statistician or a data scientist or whatever? No. Got numeracy and good modeling skills. That's good enough for me. If you're a great bioinformatician, I can teach you time series. That's not a problem, right? So really it's about what are the transferable skills? And one of the things that's really important to us in the traffic team at Transurban is, particularly for new graduates, no one walks out of their first degree and goes, I know what I want to do for the next 20 years of my life. So what we try to do, we have a 2-year graduate program where you end up all over the business. But in traffic itself, you might spend 6 months in a different team. So one of my team at the moment has got a master's degree in data science. He's actually spending a lot of time in traffic analytics for the next 6 months. And so, yeah, he's doing a lot of dashboarding, but he's also spending a lot of time getting to grips with some very deep data problems, spending a lot of time with traffic engineers, understanding exactly what matters to them and why, and really broadening his horizons. And in that way, he'll come back to my team and he'll know 10 times more than he ever did about what data we have and how we can use it and where we might have blind spots. And so he's going to come back to me in great form, and we'll do it again with another early career person, because those first years of your career, they shouldn't be really narrow. They should be opportunities to find out different things and explore. And they always come back with 10 things that I never thought of. So yeah, I don't like super specific hiring requirements. I get that in some forms it's useful, but for the kind of work that we do, it's about a growth mindset, great sandbox skills, and that's a very critical analysis of what you're doing. So as I've said before, I've taken on people that don't have qualifications in the field. It's never been a problem. They're fantastic because they've got something that I just don't have. So yeah, I think it's short-sighted in my view.
Thank you.
We have another question from Alan. Do you use temps or contractors?
Sometimes we do contract out. So we do a lot of stuff in-house. 30 people is a really big team in any industry. And we have some very specific skill sets that we are probably the largest, and let's just say the largest in Australia, if not the world, for keeping those skills in-house. But there are some things that are highly specific that, for example, me as principal econometrician, I might say to the general manager, yes, this is core econometrics, but I really want an expert that does this and this alone in to do it. Survey weighting is a big one for me. Complex surveys are a really specific skill set, and if you get them wrong, they fail silently. Right? You don't know until you come back and look at it and go, wait a second, I've got this survey that doesn't generalize to the population I need or in the ways that I want them to, particularly when you're doing transport surveys. So I personally will say to the general manager, yeah, I know it might look like I should be an expert in this, but I'm not. And so I'm going to call it and get in an expert on this. So yeah, we do occasionally use that for very specific things. There's a number of other stuff that we do. But generally we try to keep most things in-house because it's a very long memory in this area. And so that way we could pass on those critical pieces of knowledge, and chances are we'll need to do it again at some point.
And a bit along this line, Janish is asking if do you offer short internship?
Occasionally. So we have worked with universities previously. So we are participants often in the Mighty program. I think that's Monash University, where we might have a handful of undergraduates working with us over the summer, and that's always good fun. So the group last summer were looking at some geospatial analysis, and they ended up presenting to Scott Charlton, who is the CEO. And so we keep them very embedded in the team and make sure they get the opportunity to find out what it's like working with us, and really try to focus on that practical aspect of things. We tend to give them a project to work on and to be guided through, so they can find out, last year I think we did something on land use. There's always so much out there, so it's really fun. Actually, I really enjoy it.
Or Masters by Research candidates, asked by Alan.
Got anybody on that book yet, but that doesn't mean we couldn't. I mean, but if you've got a proposal, by all means reach out. We have quite strong ties with academia, like many of us come from there, and we have a deep appreciation for what we get out of that mindset. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I've floated this idea a few times actually, that maybe we should look at sponsoring an industry postdoc or something like that. So yeah, of all the places I've worked, this is one where it could work. So if you've got some ideas, reach out, because if it might fit, I will take it to the general manager. And he's got a PhD too. So, I mean, how often do you get to work for an incredibly senior executive who has a PhD? I cannot tell you how inconvenient it is to work for somebody who is smarter than you are. Man, that has never happened to me before. But you get to be the best you can because there's someone out there that wants you to be and expects you to be. And yeah, he doesn't let me get away with crap.
So I think to conclude, we ask Alice question. Alice is a PhD student in theoretical econometrics, but she's looking for a job in industry. Would you like to give any advice, since we're in a similar situation?
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things that I experienced, and it's been very common to a lot of people that I've spoken to, is making that crossover to industry can be very hard and very frustrating and, quite frankly, very demoralizing, because you put all of this effort into opening up your skills. You have amazing skills and you can get knockback after knockback for reasons that don't make any sense. And so the first thing I would say is that it's not you. It's that somebody has not been able to see what you've got on the table. And trust me, what you've got on the table is amazing. And so for candidates like yourself who are, not your standard, I just finished undergrad, very recognizable thing candidate, going through and doing things differently is the way to go, I think. So one thing to know is that a lot of companies have a program with recruitment bonuses. So if somebody in the company gets a resume and that person gets hired and the person introduced them, chances are they could get quite a sizable recruitment bonus. And so what I recommend candidates to do is to search out on LinkedIn for somebody in an organization you're interested in who is 1 to 2 steps higher than where you'd like to join, and reach out to them on LinkedIn and ask them if you could take them out for a coffee, because you'd love to hear what it's like to work in their organization. They get to know a little about you, you get to know a little bit about them. And the number of times that, someone's just come to mind, such and such is hiring, and I think, oh, that person could be a great fit, and I just introduce them. It's also a really good way to find out where you want to work. Because one of the key questions I ask people before I decide to work somewhere is, what do you do when a junior staff member makes a big mistake? That is a really telling question. And that's how they're going to treat you. I also don't care what I do very much, what industry. I just work for people that I respect. So who I work for matters to me more than what I do. And like I said, Darren's smarter than me, but he's a man of a lot of integrity. So, you know, if he says to me tomorrow, Steph, we're getting into basket weaving, I'll be, yes, sir. But that's just what works for me. So I would say reach out, pick 5 or 6 companies that interest you, go and try and find a few people in each company, reach out for a coffee. Sometimes they'll say no, sometimes they'll say yes, but all of a sudden you've found somebody who gets what you do. Somebody will. And that'll give you a good idea of how to frame your resume, who you should reach out to. They'll let you know, oh, we're currently hiring for traffic engineers. It might take a while, but, you know, find the people that see what you do, because endless applications are so demoralizing, particularly when you feel like people aren't seeing what it is you do. Like, I got a cold call for a quant job once, and the recruiter heard I was an econometrician and went, oh, so you're not a quant then? And I'm like, right, a lot of it is that the recruiter or human resources person doesn't have the context to understand. Or they go, oh, you code in R. Yeah, we're looking for someone with Python. Well, I don't care personally. I'm an R programmer all the way back. But if someone comes to me with great skills and they happen to be a Python programmer, come on board, right? So yeah, go the people route, I would recommend. Start reaching out. Once a week, reach out to a new person on LinkedIn and ask them out for coffee. Yeah, that's definitely the way to go, I think.
Kevin?
No, I'm just going to use the opportunity to make a free advertising for ourselves. Alice, you might be interested in the upcoming Young Statistician Internship event by this SSA branch. The event is not announced yet, but it is coming up. I'm one of the organizers. So, and we will invite a whole bunch of industry speakers to join us on an evening of networking, and food and drinks will be provided. So that is coming up, and you might be interested. So if you want, just send me an email or LinkedIn, whatever. Look me up. My name is Kevin Wang, W-A-N-G. Find me on LinkedIn, whatever, right? And then send me a message, and I can contact you when the event is ready to go.
Thank you a lot.
Yeah, and likewise, Alice, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You know, I'm not hiring for statisticians at the moment, but I'm always happy to have a look at a resume. I find that sometimes it just comes down to which keywords, like the number of times. I got into like a 20-minute stoush the other day about what model means. So you can imagine for people that aren't technical what that is. I hold very strong views on what a model is. All statistics are models, all models are statistics. That is not a widely held view in the traffic team, and that's the breaks of a multidisciplinary group. But if we can sort of get confused and have a bit of a fun argument about what a model actually is, how much more confusing is it with recruiters who don't necessarily have that context? So, I've had people that, have got PhDs in statistics or econometrics, and it's on their resume, but the recruiter thinks they don't know machine learning. I became a data scientist when I realized that I could earn 20 cents more in the dollar for the same work than as an econometrician. That's why I'm a data scientist most of the time. So, yeah.
Thank you a lot, Steph.
Anytime. I was definitely there once, and the only reason why I'm sitting here today is because other people, reached down the ladder to pull me up, and that's what, Stat Society does. That's what our user groups do. That's what we all do.
Well, at least we try, as SSA.
Every little bit. I would say that all of my success and upward mobility in this field has been because of the community and the network I've got around me. And so, you know, whatever it is we can do to make that stronger and more supportive, then, you know, we're doing the right thing by the next people coming up.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, definitely. And it's a nice line to end this seminar for today. Well, thank you very much, Steph, for joining us, and thank all of you for the great discussion we had. As I said, this will be recorded. So this has been recorded and will be available for our members. And our next meeting is on the 21st of September. And as Kevin said, we have an early career event on the 29th.